Okay, I am sitting here with Mr. Guy Richards. We are doing the next installment of interviewing the legends of the steel pipe business. Guy, today is Wednesday, August 14th, I want to say, 2019. Does that sound about right?
August 14th is right.
Okay. So you had to check a calendar because you don't know.
I don't know
a Wednesday from a Saturday anymore, do you?
No.
Why is that?
You got that right. Well, I'm retired, and it seems like all these days just fold into each other, you know.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
How long have you been officially retired? Or was there an official retirement?
There was about like January 1st of 2015.
I didn't realize it's been 4 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining me today. I just wanted to, you and I go way back. I'm going to be coming up on my 40th year in the business, and
wow.
I think from day one I've known Mr. Guy Richards.
Huh.
But I want you to help me today with my memory and with the history, because what I'm trying to do with this project is just get the history of some of the legends from the steel pipe business. So, one of the very first questions that I wanted to ask you was, how did you get your start? What pipe company did you start with, and what year was it?
Well, I first started in the steel business in 1964. Went to work for U.S. Steel in their Geneva plant in Utah.
In Geneva, Utah, Orem, Utah.
Yeah. And I worked there from 64 to 69. And I actually worked in the pipe mill there at one point in time.
What did you do there?
I was a scheduler. And it was kind of like probably the easiest job I've ever had in my life. I could do it in a half hour, and never got paid so much money in my entire life at that point in time for doing so little. But I ultimately worked in the plate mill, and didn't ever work in the sheet mill. Worked in the structural mill, worked in the pipe mill, and
so in 1964, how old were you when you started?
19 years old. Yeah.
What brought you to U.S. Steel in Geneva?
Well, my brother was working there, and he said, why don't you come out and apply here, because I was working for a concrete block company, and that was just kind of like a crap job. So anyway, so I said, okay, I'll go out there. And I applied, and you had to pass a type test of 40 words a minute. I couldn't pass it. So anyway, I ultimately passed it, and the guy gave me a job, and I started working in the plate shipping area, and it all evolved from there, basically. I built a good enough name for myself in there that they gave me the opportunity to interview for sales jobs. And so I interviewed for a sales job in Denver and then Salt Lake City, and didn't get either one of them. So then they asked me, do you want to interview for a sales job in Seattle? And I said, what for? I never get them. And they interview. So I interviewed for Seattle and was offered a job up here as I think my official title was service correspondent or something like that, which means you were a flunky. But anyway.
Was that how you ended up moving to Seattle?
Oh yeah, I
moved with
moved.
U.S. Steel, and that was at 1960?
In February of '69, I came up here. Drove into Seattle, and the billboard said, would the last person out of Seattle please turn off the lights? And I go on, what the heck did I do,
And what was that about? I know the story, but I want you to tell the story.
Well, it was a major downturn in Boeing, and there was people leaving Seattle like crazy. They thought maybe it might turn into a ghost town, or fortunately it wasn't that bad, but I ultimately bought a house in Kirkland, and there were 8 houses for sale on the street at the same time when I bought that house. And that was pretty much the way it was. It was pretty dreary as far as economic forecast for this area, but unfortunately there's not a hell of a lot of steel in an airplane, so Boeing downturn didn't mean much to us. So we had some.
And then did U.S. Steel did they have a pipe yard up here or a steel service center?
They had they had U.S. Steel Supply, which was down on Lander Street and about, well, I don't know, Lander and maybe 6th Avenue, something like that. But and that was an area where you could call them and say, I've got a customer and he's not going to be able to buy the quantity that a mill requires, so you just flash them off to U.S. Steel Supply, and they did the same, vice versa. They would, if he had a customer that they thought was should be buying mill, they would refer them to us. But anyway, yeah, I stayed with U.S. Steel in Seattle from '69 through the steel shortage of 1974, whereas all of the domestic mills were on allocation. They called their customers up and said, you can have this much tonnage in this quarter. It was not a very pretty situation. I mean, there were, and basically what it did was it just forced a lot of the customers to increase their buys offshore, and you know, it was just catastrophic for the domestic steel industry. And
what caused that?
Well, from what I think, there was a every 3-year cycle with the steelworkers union. They would sign a 3-year contract, and then just about the time the contract was about to expire, you know, customers would start to load up on inventories, and then if the contract was renewed, everybody looked around, and all your customers were full of inventory, and you know, and then there'd be a big downturn. So there's always these big upturns and downturns, and so a lot of people blame it on the United Steelworkers Union as far as the cyclical things that happen like that. But I don't know for sure.
Sure. So you worked with U.S. Steel till 1974, or?
Well, I left there in '75.
In '75.
Yeah.
And tell me about that transition.
Well, let me tell you about this. You know, when you call up a customer in first of a quarter and say, you can have 20 tons of plate, or you can have 20 tons of plate and 30 tons of sheet, and they send in their orders, and you fill them. Well, you know, a secretary could do that job, and I became extremely bored at U.S. Steel, and so I started just looking around, you know, and ultimately left there in, I think it was March of '75. Went to work for the Coeur d'Alene Company out of Spokane, Jimmy Colson and Union Iron Works division, and I was their Seattle sales rep, and they had been caught with thousands of tons of inventory sitting on the docks here in Seattle or stored in Everett, and he said, I want to hire you to get rid of all of this steel. So I was basically a giveaway artist, like, I mean, T1 plate for 15 cents a pound and stuff like that. You know, it was a tough time for him because everybody thought the thing would keep going, and the bottom fell out of it. So anyway, I worked.
They're still in business.
Are they?
Yeah, they're thriving over there.
Good.
And now called Cda Metals.
Okay.
Based out of Spokane, Washington, and his sons, the Colsons,
Yeah.
still own it and run it.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I worked for him, and then finally he says, when we got rid of a lot of inventory, he says, I want you to move over to Spokane. And so I went over to Spokane and looked at houses, and I would work in the office during the week and stuff like that. And during that period of time, Bill Tagmeyer, who was the district manager of L.B. Foster in Tacoma, called me and said, we need to have lunch. I said, okay, let's have lunch. And anyway, we had lunch, and he offered me a job, and I said, well, your timing is impeccable. Because I really didn't want to move to, in fact, nothing against Spokane. I think Spokane's a great city, but I just was entrenched, you know, in a lot of stuff here. And anyway, so I went to work for L.B. Foster, and I think that was November of '75. And that basically was my first experience with a steel pipe distributor. And I had sold lots of steel pipe people while I was working for U.S. Steel. I sold Liberty Equipment, I sold Puget Sound Pipe, I sold, who else was a big one? Oh, Keenan was big at that time. Anyway, so
You knew all the players.
yeah, there was a lot of good pipe outfits here in Seattle.
And what was L.B. Foster like in the Seattle-Tacoma area at that time? Paint me that picture, because I have a lot of friends that came from that company.
L.B. Foster was a family-owned company based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and each division, we were the West Coast division, they had a Houston division, I think they had a Midwest division, and then the East Coast. But each had its own vice president, and it was run as a separate cost center. And
Was there a pipe yard?
there was a pipe yard in Tacoma, in the Tide Flats at the time. Not much pipe in it. Not much of anything, really, as I remember. The inventory-wise, they did a lot of brokerage sales, and at one point in time they made a major buy from an Italian mill. I can't tell you the name of it, but we had like 4,000 tons of 6-inch quarter wall hit the dock in Tacoma. So
Which is all water well casing.
water well casing, which is, and we're thinking, you know, what was the brains behind this? But anyway, gradually we got more and more involved in the pipe business. So one thing we learned was that we could splice pipe and make piles out of it, and we did a lot of that from that period of time on, and shipped into Alaska and other places. But Alaska was our prime customer, and we sold a lot of pile jobs in Alaska. And so then we had to have the inventory to kind of back that up, and so the inventory kept growing and growing. We had H piles and sheet piles, but pipe was our main sale item.
You know, you mentioned Mr. Tagmeyer, which
Yeah.
of course he went on to great things at Northwest Pipe
Yeah.
in Portland. But who were some of the other gentlemen that you know, people might recognize names?
Well, when I went to work at L.B. Foster, Paul Best was the pipe salesman, and he had moved up there from Hayward, California office, and so he was a relative newcomer to Tacoma also. And then we had a guy by the name of Dan Heim. I don't know if that name ever strikes, but he was a pretty good sales guy for construction products. And then we had a rail salesman, Terry Zikovich, and that was another name you probably don't recognize. But
L.B. Foster was big into the railroad.
oh yeah, always has been, always will be. That's how that company got its main start. By doing relay rail, they would just say, pick up that rail, turn it around, and put the wear part on the outside, and you've got a new, because rail, I guess, wears from the inside out. So, and we did a lot of business with relay rail, especially the short line railroads in Washington, and we did a couple of things in Alaska. But
who are some of the other names? The reason I ask is I was talking to a buddy just a few days ago. Told him I was coming over here, and he said he worked with you 1 year, and he said be sure and say hello, Charles Boatwright.
Oh yeah, we had Foster closed down their yard in Tacoma, and so. Then the Houston district took over management of the West Coast for, it was just kind of a convolute. I heard it from one guy from LA, LB Foster, and he says, it's just another reorganization of the deck chairs on the Titanic. Which, I'd never heard that before. And anyway, but so then we were managed by people out of Houston, and I think that Charles Boatwright, I don't know how long he was here, but
1 or 2 years.
Yeah, and they brought in a guy from Canada, from Montreal, that for his wife wouldn't stay in the States for over a year, so he lasted about 9 or 10 months, and so it was a constant upheaval of people, and that's about the time Paul left and he started Best Pipe, and with he got money out of Canada through the Dumais family, and started that with Ray Knoll. I don't know did you ever meet Ray Knoll?
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
I know who you're talking about with, no relation to Pete Knowles.
No.
Different person altogether.
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember the Best Pipe yard in Kent.
Yes.
If I remember right.
Oh yeah.
And because I remember when all you guys were there in the early 80s, when I say all you guys, Paul, yourself, Doug Pagel, Bruce Campbell, and it was a hell of a team. I just remember going over there in the early 80s and again, the big downfall of the early 80s and seeing mountains of pipe.
Oh yeah.
We would drive through and these mountains of pipe would be stacked 30, 40 feet high. But I didn't realize, I didn't know what Paul's ownership was. I did, for some reason, I thought that the name Best Pipe did not have to do with Paul Best. Am I wrong there? You correct me.
Well, as far as I know, it was Paul Best. And,
okay.
But I don't think he had any ownership.
He did not.
I don't think so. He was an employee. He was hired as the manager,
and they called it Best Pipe.
Best Pipe, yeah. And then they had they had Best Pipe in Denver. Then it was Chet Thompson.
Chet Thompson, yes.
And then they had Best Pipe in Sacramento, California. And I can't remember the guy that ran that yard.
Oh, I remember that gentleman also. I'll have to think about
Nice guy, though. And then they had, in Canada, they had Transocean Industries with Frank Rice, and over in Saskatchewan, I think it was, they had Arnie, somebody that did, can't remember the name of the company, but they had all these little things going on, and the first thing they did was they bought a shipload of pipe from Corinth Pipe Works out of Greece, and it was just great pipe, and we had full-size ranges up to the half-inch walls, 20-inch, 24-inch, and it was really well-stocked, but like you say, they had blanket purchase orders with people like IPSCO and So if IPSCO had a run of 42-inch 479 wall spiral well pipe, you got all the reject out of it.
Right.
And so it just kept coming. And it trickled out, you know, and it had to, you know, the pockets had to be pretty deep for the I don't know, I was there for 2 or 3 years, I think it was, and things just started to fall apart. Like,
so you went from LB Foster,
yep,
over to Best Pipe.
Yep.
Did Paul hire you?
Oh yeah.
Okay. And this was when? Late 70s or early 80s?
Early 80s. Yeah, like 81, I think it was.
Okay.
And then worked there for Best Pipe and Steel for, trying to remember when we started National Pipe and Piling, because that was the next move.
Yeah, and it seemed like the four of you guys just kind of all went at the same time.
Yeah, well, the bills at Best Pipe were starting to not get paid, and the big shocker to two of us was they hadn't paid any of the medical insurance bills, and we didn't have medical insurance, so you know, it was, we're out of here.
Yeah. So now,
and then when he started National Pipe and Piling, that was through Earl and Fidel. And
how did that get started? I mean, I know a little bit, but because Earl and Fidel owned National Pipe and Piling,
yeah,
not correct?
Oh yeah, and I know that I think Paul approached Earl and said, because the Best Pipe people hired a corporate turnaround artist to change everything around and get it back on its feet, which was pretty much self-defeating, because you know, what are you going to do with 42-inch whatever? Right. You're just waiting for the something to come along. But anyway, so they let Paul go as the manager, and Paul was looking for work, and I think that Paul approached Earl and said, I need a gig, and they put up the money, and
Earl and Fidel put up the money, and
go to work. Yeah, and then Paul left. I went to work with Paul and Doug Pago and Bruce Campbell. We all kind of migrated over there, and you know, and I worked there for, I don't know. Well, I started my own business in '89, so I think it was '84 to '89 I was there, and so that's pretty much how it started. I left there, and I think we incorporated like December of '89, so we're coming up on 30 years in business here in this December. So
yeah, that's Richards Pipe and Steel.
Yeah, so
congratulations.
Yeah,
30 years, that's a long time.
Well, I remember when I first started, people told me, well, if you make it past 5 years, you'll probably make it. And so when I made it past 5 years, it was kind of like, phew. But yeah, it was an adventure.
Well, in 1989, when you started Richards Pipe, if my math is correct, you'd been in the steel business 25 years.
Yeah. I think the main thing that I did when I started my business, I look back and I said, I should have done this a lot earlier. At least 5 years earlier, but you know.
Hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And everything seems to work out.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were some of the biggest challenges that you had starting Richards Pipe and Steel? What was some of the main?
Well, the biggest challenge always with a young company is money. You know, there's never enough money, and I finally I couldn't get a bank line. I finally got a bank line after I think 5 years, where I could actually revolve money in and out of it. And But that first 5 years, financially, it was just kind of like sweating bullets all the time, you know. But
And was Richard's Pipe just out of an office?
yeah, we
Did
operated.
you mostly broker?
We had inventory. It was stored up here in Seattle at CTEC, or is it CPAC, handling, and we also stored at Sound Delivery Services yard. I had a good friend of mine that worked for Mitsubishi International Corporation, and I called him up and I said, I'm going to start my own business. And he says, oh, you are? And he says, well, send me a purchase order. And I sent him a purchase order for like 1,200 tons of pipe. With
A lot of pipe.
Yeah. All the way up through 48 inch. And, you know, within 90 days here, all this pipe shows up. And I move it over to, at that time, moved it over to Sound Delivery's yard. And the guy never asked for anything in writing. You know, it was just handshake deal. And we're still good friends, and I've always done everything I said I was going to do, and he did more than his part. It had to be pretty risky for him to put in an order for us, and
Brand new company.
yeah, brand new people.
No credit.
Yeah.
But he had worked with you for years before. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, he and I first met. When I worked at U.S. Steel, this is from 69 to 75, I was always the one that the receptionist called for crank people that came into the reception area. Had a question about steel, or a lot of times it was somebody was disgruntled because their cyclone fence was rusty. We didn't even handle cyclone fence. But anyway, he came into our office one day and wanted some catalogs. And here's this Japanese trading company. I says, well, I'm not sure I can really give you any catalogs right now, but you know, I could meet you at a bar later on tonight and give you anything you want that's available for public. And anyway, so he and I just went in the bar and had a couple of drinks, and I gave him all the catalogs I could give him, and then he ultimately lined up a dinner with the outside salesman for U.S. Steel in Spokane, who is Bob Weldon. I don't know if you ever remember that name.
I remember the name, but I never met him.
Bob Weldon and I and this guy and his boss. So we had a great dinner at the Mikado in Seattle, and we were famous friends ever since. Every once in a while, I'd just call up and have a question, you know, and I'd say, I don't know the answer, but I'll find out, or stuff like that. And,
Sure.
And then when I got to the point where I could buy my own steel, well, I had a relationship with him when I worked at Foster and also at Richard's Pipe, but he was he was a very trusting individual, and in fact, we still have lunch together every once in a while.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you like me, sweating bullets those first paying for that inventory, you know?
Yeah. Well.
First
Yeah.
go around. Your first one at the office, last one to leave, and you're trying to sell,
Oh, yeah.
sell.
Yeah, I had a day compartmentalized from 7 a.m. until 5 p.m. it was sales, and then from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. it was administrative stuff, paying bills, sending quotations, stuff like, you know, just and so, you know, I guess and then the last action of the day was the night deposit at the bank. I don't think my bank ever saw me until I got to the point where I could pare down the hours to 8 hours a day. But yeah, it was a different experience. But
Right.
you know, when you look back on it and you say, there's no option for failure.
Right.
You don't, so you just do it, and you keep doing it until it gets either easier, better, or less strenuous, less stressful, whatever. But hopefully sooner or later it gets that way, and there's money in the bank, and people call you up and say, I got this pipe, and you say, send it on, I'll wire you $100,000, and it's just,
right.
That's when it gets real fun, but
Sure.
the first 5 years for me were like sweating bullets, I'll tell you that.
Right.
And I'm sure, I don't know, many of these people that you interview or feel the same way.
They all have a similar story.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. One of the things I wanted to ask you, as obviously you started in the steel business 55 years ago, what were some of the major changes just that you saw, from your early days? And to give you an example, I still remember the first time I had to go downtown Spokane and use a telefax machine. This telefax machine, wouldn't fit in this room that we're sitting in right now, a 12 by 12 office. But tell me about some of the major changes that come to your mind over the years, starting from the early 60s.
Well, like U.S. Steel, all of the communication between offices was done by teletype.
What's teletype?
Well, it's similar like Western Union. You type it in, you feed a tape through, and it fires it off to the destination it's supposed to go to. And then we actually got one of those fax machines like you're talking about. It took about 5 minutes for a page to go through, and it was like and
it was huge.
Oh yeah. And then right before I left U.S. Steel, they implemented a phone system, what they called SteelCom. And you could dial, it was still rotary dial, you could dial any desk in the corporation, and that was just, it was totally unique.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it was a phone system that they implemented,
and was this with L.B. Foster?
No, it was U.S. Steel.
Aha.
So and then, but I remember walking into Paul Best's office at L.B. Foster, and he had one of those old Frieden calculators, that'll be $30 a foot. You're listening to all the wheels go around in it, and none of it was electronic, it was all mechanical. So and then you get involved with welding things, and you learn welding codes and qualifying welders and all of the things that go with that, and then the non-destructive testing of welds, and the more you do, the more you learn, and it's just it was a good education.
Yeah,
and I'm sure there's still a lot of it going on, but a lot of that old stuff, like those old calculators, it was just just sitting there, finally it stops, and okay, that'll be $30 a foot. So it was interesting.
Yeah, that's a great story. Thank you for that. If you could go back or if you could tell some new guy who's coming up in the steel pipe business, what kind of advice would you give yourself as a starter, or what kind of advice would you give a young person who's coming into the steel business? Something that you wish somebody else would have told you about.
Be totally honest with your customers and your suppliers. There's once you build a chink in that armor, a lot of things go away from you. I mean, I found that to be the truth, you know, so.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. That is good advice. There's no doubt about that.
'Cause, yeah.
If you could try to explain the amount of work or effort that it takes to be successful in this business.
Well, it's all in your approach, I suppose. You know, like I said, I compartmentalized my days so that I was making sure that I got everything done. And sometimes it takes 12 hours, sometimes it takes 8 hours, sometimes it takes 16 hours. So you just do it, and hopefully you have good help that takes a lot of that pressure off of you. But sometimes, like I said, I worked by myself for close to 2 years, and yeah, out of a one-man office, you know, or yeah. So you have to be prepared to do it, and it's like I said before, you know, when you approach it like failure is not an option, you get her done.
That's right. That's right. Very good.
And there's no substitute for hard work. That's about it.
That's right. Was there any pivotal or defining moment in your career that impacted yourself or your business positively or negatively? Was there one moment or one period of time, something that may or may not have happened?
Well, I think one of the things that was a big turnaround here was buying this property. And
what year did you buy this property?
I bought it in 94, I think it was.
So you were in business 5 years.
Yeah.
As Richard's Pipe.
Yeah, and it was just raw farmland, little farmhouse on it, but it took us a long time to get permits to fill it, and all the other crap you go through with these agencies nowadays, you know, wetlands test and blah blah blah. But anyway, that allowed us to do a lot more things. I mean, we bought a threader, we bought a groover, we bought, you know, all of this stuff so that we could do more things with pipe, and rather than send it out, because we sent a lot of that stuff out for people to do. So yeah, the 7 acres here we have really turned our whole business around, I think. So
very good, very good. Was there ever a lowest or a toughest point in your career that you can remember?
Yeah, the day I got sued. Oh, but I don't know if you want to hear that story or not. But
if you're willing to share, I mean,
we had a situation. We sold some 24-inch 5/8 wall pipe piles in Alaska, and they were foundation piles for 100-foot light poles. And anyway, so they came in and they drove the pipe, and then they welded a plate on top of it, and then they bolted the big 100-foot light pole to the top of it. And Anchorage had a windstorm of about 75 miles an hour, and the whole thing failed. And so the electrical...
What year was this?
Oh, boy, I think it had to be somewhere in the 90s.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, we got sued by the electrical contractor. And so I call up our insurance company, and they say, well, we'll have to go investigate. So I flew to Anchorage with 2 attorneys, and then they had another attorney that they had retained up there. So there's 3 attorneys and myself. So anyway, I'm sweating bullets on this thing because fortunately nobody was hurt when the thing fell over. But just to make a long story short, I went into one of my customers' offices up there, and he says, "Oh yeah," he says, "I've got the pipe and everything sitting out in my yard." He says, "We went out and pulled it for the state so they could replace it." And he says, "But I know the whole story behind that." And so I says, "Well, what is the whole story?" And he says, "Well, they bought these base plates, and the center hole was 26-inch ID." I said, "Well, it was 24-inch pipe." "Yeah. So there's a big gap in there." And anyway, he says, "Come on out, I'll show you this in the plate." And so he got a grinder, and we started grinding away right at the edge. And they had taken flat bar and rolled it around in the inside and welded it, sealed, seal weld, ground it flush, made it look. And then they set that over the top of the 24.
So the pipe should have been 26-inch, or the hole in the plate should have been 24-inch. One of the two.
Either way.
Either way.
So anyway,
there was a cover.
So I grabbed these three attorneys and say, "We didn't do anything wrong here. What went wrong here was the electrical contractor himself trying to." Anyway, so it's like, whew. And then the insurance company turns around and countersues the electrical contractor for costs. And I don't know if they ever got any money out of them, but it was just having a friend in the business that says, "Oh yeah, I know the whole story behind that."
Right.
And I go, "Wow."
Yeah.
And that was the only catastrophic failure I'd ever had of anything I sold.
Sure.
And
scared the bejesus out of it.
Oh yeah.
Because something like that can, kill a business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was about the only time. Never have been sued since.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you shared that story. Thank you. There's a lot to learn from that.
Oh yeah.
And so yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate that.
Well, and finally you start looking at things in Alaska, and the supply chain is so long that for them to go get another plate, or whatever, or another pipe, when they got a pipe sticking in the ground that's been driven, and you kind of sympathize with their field expediency solution, but man, it wasn't the right way to do it. And it was.
Let me ask you this: do you have or have you had during your career, possibly years and years ago, a mentor or a leader or somebody who played a key role in your success?
Well, I think the only thing that's close to a mentor that I can think of would be Paul Best, because he and I worked side by side, and we tried to work out solutions to problems, and anyway, he was always fun to work with, and we did a lot of business together, and but I'm not sure. I think I knew more about steel making and steel processes than any of them because of my experience with U.S. Steel, and as far as a mentor, I'd say probably not, but
sure. Yeah, very good. If there was anything that you could do differently, that if you could go back in time, I know you'd already mentioned one small thing,
yeah,
of starting Richards sooner, but if there's anything that you could do differently, playing Monday morning quarterback, what would it be?
Well, I'd probably, Randy would have got into the property sooner, or even at the time I incorporated, just because it did take us a while to get situated on the property here, and it seemed like that really kind of curtailed our ability to do business for, I don't know, 5 years, something like that. But
Sure.
yeah. But other than that, I can't think of anything.
Okay. As we're kind of winding down, I've only got a couple more questions. Besides your career, besides the steel pipe business, can you share something else that maybe you're most proud of, or that you are proud of, that gives you a lot of joy or satisfaction looking back?
Well, outside of business, I was a scoutmaster for 15 years. And during that time, both of my sons became Eagle Scouts. And I had I think a total of like 33 Eagle Scouts go through my troop in that 15 years. And I have still some of them that send me Christmas cards every once in a while. I have some that send me thank you notes. Anyway, it was a real rewarding experience for me, and sometimes it was like I got 2 weeks of vacation a year, and 1 week was scout camp, and the other week was devoted to my family, and so the time sometimes was not too welcome by my family, but yeah.
At least the boys were.
Yeah, the boys were okay. The wife probably wasn't too okay with a lot of it, but anyway, I think that's. I got awarded the Silver Beaver Award. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but it's the highest award a council can give to a scouter, a volunteer scouter in their area. So got that, and so I was rewarded with some recognition. But I think the ultimate recognition is the fact that boys still stay in touch and our Christmas cards and
Sure.
things like that.
As a former Boy Scout myself, and being very active in the Scouts as a young person, I know the difference between a good Scoutmaster and a not so good one.
Yeah.
And my days with the LDS Scout Troop 323, we just had a terrific time. It was some of the best memories of my life, and those times for those young men are critical. And to know that 33 of them made Eagle Scout, I know what that entails, and that's high recognition just right there. I know what that number means.
We
over 2 of them a year.
Yeah, on
average.
We had one family that had 8 boys in it, and all 8 of them became Eagle Scouts. So it was just, the day when the last one got his Eagle, there was 7 brothers standing right beside of him, all with their merit badge sashes on and everything else like that. It was just really a special experience, and I wouldn't give that up for anything. But
that's fantastic.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And then after that, they decided I should be an explorer advisor. So I did that for about 5 years after that. But our deal was I went to these are 16, 17, 18-year-old boys, and so we decided that we had to have a post specialty. Like some explorer posts are law enforcement, some of them are paramedics, stuff like. So our post specialty we elected was mountaineering, and so we worked a lot on mountaineering, and we ended up climbing pretty much. Well, we climbed Mount St. Helens, we climbed Mount Baker, we climbed Mount Adams, we climbed Mount Hood down in Oregon, and then we capped it off by doing Rainier. We did like 55,000 vertical feet of mountain between June and August of that 1 year, and then yeah, I was the best shape I ever was my entire life. Anyway, but yeah, that was a special experience too. Just getting to the top of Rainier was. I got a picture in my den with a whole line of scouts and adults on the top of Rainier, and
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
so,
awesome.
So yeah, and my anytime anybody's ever asked me for an advice about being a leader, and I said, you're in the business of creating memories, so get with it and don't shirk it one bit. Just and that seemed to work very well for the guys that take that mantra on and go for it with these young men.
Right.
And I see a lot of times, I used to have kids show up that I'd never seen before for a scout outing. And I could usually tell within a few minutes after they showed up whether or not they were from an intact family or a single parent family. You could just tell. But anyway, that was the deal. We're in the business of creating memories, and I draw a lot on some of the memories that I had. We did the Colorado River run when I was a scout, from the Height Ferry down to Lee's Ferry, which at that time they were constructing Glen Canyon Dam for.
And this is in the 50s, I bet.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I still think about that trip. That was just one of the greatest trips I ever had. And
that's awesome.
So payback is fair.
That's right.
You get a memory, you give a memory. Yeah, so
that's right. That's awesome, guy.
That's it for me.
Thanks for sharing. Appreciate it very much. Last question.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that maybe you were thinking about or that you wanted to share? We got plenty of time, so is there anything that I may have overlooked?
Oh, I don't think so. It pretty much covers the gamut. I think it's just like you and Scott and anybody else that goes on their own and starts their own business. It's living the American dream, and yes, sometimes you have to sweat bullets, but hopefully those bullets turn into silver bullets or gold bullets, and yeah, it's neat to see you guys do so well. And
thank you.
Yeah.
I sure appreciate your time today, Mr. Richards.
Oh, thank you for doing it. It's just a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Bet.
All right.